Let's take a look at some cases, some interesting, very interesting cases that have been decided in the Irish courts there in the last week. The first one is one that I've actually covered in a video myself. It's to do with the Domino's pizza drivers. The Supreme Court has decided that after a 13-year dispute about whether Domino's pizza delivery drivers were employees or self-employed contractors, the Supreme Court has now decided that they are employees, that were employees for tax purposes. Originally, the Revenue Commissioner said they were employees. The High Court agreed with the Revenue Commissioner, or agreed with the company rather, and decided that they were the High Court agreed with the Revenue Commissioners that they were employees. The Court of Appeal overturned the High Court decision, and the Court of Appeal decided that the Domino's pizza drivers were independent contractors. The drivers then appealed this to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court have decided that they are employees for tax purposes. I have a separate video on that Domino's pizza driver case on my YouTube channel. You'll find it there if you're interested, or if this is something that's of interest to you. Another interesting case was the broadcaster that was accused of engaging in sexual acts with a girl who was 16. He was found not guilty at the Circuit Criminal Court. That was to do with a so-called well-known broadcaster, man of 40 years of age. There was 3 counts of sexual assault, sexual acts with a 16-year-old girl over a decade ago, 10 years ago. He has been acquitted. Looking at the case, there was certainly a conflict of evidence between him and what the girl had to say, and there was certain inconsistencies, I guess, so he has been acquitted. Another interesting case was the finding of guilty against a school teacher, a lady school teacher who was accused of assaulting a male student 38 years ago. She was a student teacher at a Dublin secondary school at the time, and the gentleman in question, the victim, is I think around about 50 years of age now, but she has been convicted. She's a school teacher, she's 63 years of age, and the jury returned a majority guilty verdict. So that is a sad case with no winners for sure. Very sad case. There's a very interesting case there now being heard at the moment in the Supreme Court. Is to do with a man, John O'Mara. I think he's from Tipperary. He has 3 children, but he is excluded from the widow's pension, from any widow's pension. His partner passed away, but remember, she was a partner, not a spouse, not a wife. She died in 2021, and this gentleman was with his partner for 20 years before she died. He's basically saying that the exclusion of him from any widower's pension is discriminatory and is unconstitutional, and he's basically saying that it's based on prejudice and discrimination. He has 3 children. He's appealing the Minister for Social Protection's refusal to grant the pension following the death of his partner, who was his partner for about 20 years, and the children's mother. So that'll be a very interesting case, because there would be quite a few people, I believe, in the country in long-term, long-standing relationships where they haven't been married, and the question then, if one of them passes away, about a widow's or widower's pension would be very, very important to them. The decision in that case now will be interesting. That's a Supreme Court case. Very interestingly, the Michael Lynn case. Michael Lynn was a solicitor. He's accused of stealing more than 27 million euros during the boom years. The boom years were the Celtic Tiger years. He was a solicitor. This all comes down to solicitors' undertakings to banks. We get loans from banks on behalf of clients to purchase property and so on, and we give an undertaking to the bank to register a charge to secure the bank's interest in a property. And in this case, Michael Lynn was not just giving the undertakings, but he was also the borrower. So he was borrowing, he was building properties or investing in properties, speculating himself, and he's accused of stealing more than 27 million euros. There was a case, I think, a few years ago there, where I believe, if memory serves me right, the jury was unable to reach a verdict. So this is actually a retrial. He's a former solicitor and a property investor. He's 55, charged with stealing more than 27 million. The case is expected to last 8 weeks, and there was a 15-member jury panel. That features, or one feature of the case, was that Mr. Lynn accepted he had received the money. So that's not in dispute. Mr. Berry then, for the prosecution, said the case alleged that Mr. Lynn had secured the loans from the financial institutions, telling each that the money was to be used to buy particular properties and that the lenders would have a first legal charge against the properties, but this did not prove to be the case. He said one example was concerning a property in Holt called Glen Lyon, against which Mr. Lynn secured a mortgage for 4.1 million in April 2007 from the Irish Nationwide Building Society. Then days later he got 3.78 million from ACC Bank, and then days later again he got 3.85 million from Bank of Scotland. At the time, the guide price for the property in question was 5.5 million. Counsel told the jury that they should leave any prejudices they had against solicitors or banks outside the courtroom. That could be a difficult ask, but that's what they must do nevertheless. He said that jury members might think that banks got off very lightly for what happened during 2006 and 2007 and had not been overburdened by humility or gratitude since being bailed out, but such factors had to be left outside the courtroom. He said there were 21 counts in the case, each one of which represented a particular loan. He said theft in Ireland is defined as taking something without the consent of the owner, and consent that is obtained through deception is not consent. So at the heart of the allegations, and this is something I'm very familiar with because I do quite a bit of property law, against Mr. Lynn, at the heart of the allegations were solicitors' undertakings, where a solicitor gave an undertaking that money being released by a financial institution would be used for the purpose for which it was given out. It would be the prosecution's case that Mr. Lynn did what he did because he was a solicitor and a property investor and knew how the system worked. So the jury were told by Judge Martin Nolan that they should not discuss the case with others and should not conduct their own research on electronic devices, etc., etc., etc. It's expected the first witness will give evidence on Thursday morning, that's yesterday morning, so that's expected to run for 8 weeks. It'll be interesting. People are interested in solicitors and the legal profession and so on, and have particular views. Speaking of the legal profession, there's a law professor there. He's accused of a fatal shooting. He's looking to be returned to his 170-acre farm for welfare of livestock. It's a bail condition that he stays away from the farm. This gentleman, senior counsel, Trinity College professor, Dermot Phelan, he's seeking to vary bail conditions to allow him to remain in organic farming at Tala Farm. You may recall this case. It involves the fatal shooting of a gentleman who I think was on his land. He found him on his land at Tala. Yes, he's charged with the murder of Keith Conlon at Tala on February 2022. Mr. Conlon was seriously injured in the shooting incident and died at Tala University Hospital 2 days later. Mr. Phelan was charged with Mr. Conlon's murder shortly afterwards, and he had application for bail refused by the High Court, but the Court of Appeal overturned that decision and bailed him after 2 separate bonds of €50,000 were lodged with the court. There's a trial date of May 29th next year before the Central Criminal Court. This is a fascinating case as well because, let's call a spade a spade. This fella is a Trinity professor, he's a senior counsel, and he's accused of murder. He's accused of murder, of shooting somebody on his land. A father of 4 was the fatality, was the gentleman who was killed. But Mr. Phelan has been charged with Mr. Conlon's murder, and that is going to be an interesting case too. And it's not too often you see senior counsels accused of murder or indeed any crimes, and it's not too often you see Trinity College professors accused of murder or any crimes, and that's what you have in this case. You have a combination of both, so that will be certainly an interesting one. Finally then there was a case decided there yesterday, and this is a fascinating case, I think. Maybe I'm just an anorak and I find these things fascinating. But this involves a fella driving on Noel Burke. He's 37 years of age. He was driving on the motorway with his arms folded like this. So he's driving with no hands. He's pulled over by the Gardaí after they saw him driving with no hands. But he thought he was charged then with dangerous driving. And interestingly, Noel Burke, he's a Tesla owner. He drove with no arms or no hands on the M50 with his arms folded. He's been cleared of dangerous driving. The defence accepted he was driving with no hands on the steering wheel. However, he testified that he was monitoring the car's autopilot driver assistance system, and he gave an in-depth explanation of how it worked. And I think he's a mechanical engineer. He works for a firm that develops military products and devices for autonomous vehicles. So this is an area that he'd be fairly familiar with. He was acquitted following a contested hearing. Contested hearing means he pleaded not guilty. He wasn't guilty of dangerous driving. He told the Garda prosecuting told the court that he and a colleague were driving on the M50 when he noticed a Tesla car heading northbound near the Ballymun Junction. He said he looked left, 2 lanes across, and he observed a male. He had his arms folded at the time, high across his chest, quite high, almost to his chin. It was quite obvious. So he alerted his colleague that the accused was driving with no hands. He accepted that there was nothing dangerous about the driving, which he described as a bit mechanical. The Garda pulled Mr. Burke over and asked him what he was doing, and he replied, "I was using autopilot." Garda McCluskey then cautioned Mr. Burke not to drive without his hands on the steering wheel. So the court heard Mr. Burke had no previous convictions, had a clean driving licence, and had been driving within the speed limit. Cross-examined by Defence Counsel, the Garda agreed that the traffic was not very heavy. It was a dry day, good visibility. The Garda accepted nothing about the car's condition caused concern, and Mr. Burke cooperated. In evidence, Mr. Burke said he bought the Tesla in March 2020 and he had a previous automated vehicle. He said that the autopilot had to be engaged and only under acceptable conditions. He explained if another vehicle started to move in to the lines between the lanes, his car would slow to accommodate that vehicle. However, the system, he said, did not respond like a human, so while driving he paid close attention to the other vehicle's movements and, quote, "I tried to monitor that and intervene if necessary." Under cross-examination with the state solicitor, it was put to him that it was unsafe to drive using no hands on a public road. He replied not with the correct systems, but added that without an automated system to control the car, it would be dangerous. That's kind of self-evident. Asked if the unexpected happened, would he be able to react as quickly as a person with their hands on the steering wheel, he said, "I would be unsure of that." The judge asked him if it would be better to have 2 hands on the wheel to take control of the vehicle, and he answered probably yes. The judge agreed with the defence solicitor that the case law definitions of dangerous driving said that there had to be a dangerous or a serious direct risk to another person, and there was no evidence, remember, in this case of a serious direct risk to another person. Judge Hughes remarked that while having 2 hands on the wheel was optimal, he believed the accused was truthful and accepted Mr. Burke was monitoring the autopilot system. So that's an interesting one. I wouldn't like to be trying it every day, and I don't have autopilot in my car, but I think I'll stick with the 2 hands on the steering wheel. Hope you find this roundup interesting and useful. You may be interested in subscribing to my YouTube channel, or you may be interested in listening to my podcast, the Irish Law and Small Business Podcast. You can listen to it on iTunes or Spotify, and if you do, I'd appreciate if you left a review on iTunes or Spotify, and thanks for listening.